Last Sunday, we began a two-Sunday series, and I found out all about Christian charity last Sunday. We had it scheduled to meet in the Yoda room, and there were enormous complaints about space and the ability to drink coffee. I want you to know that the kingdom has come. We have coffee, and you have the privilege of drinking it here in this great hall. It's great to see you this morning. Thank you for being here as a part of this remarkable series, really, that George Forbes has pulled together. I'm very grateful to him for for many, many things, but certainly his tremendous leadership in our city and our community. And you can see by the panel he has assembled this morning that this will be a remarkable time. I'm glad that my friend Tim Hagan can be here. It's great to see him and the remarkable things he has done in our community. Mike Polensek, who is an esteemed council member in the city of Cleveland. And Mansfield Frazier, who is a remarkable guy to know and has created a vineyard in Huff. So without further ado, thank you, gentlemen, for being here, and George for your leadership, and thank you to all of you for being a part of this time together.
Me? Thank you. Last Sunday when we convened the session with Dennis Kucinich, Dennis was supposed to be today. Oh, I'm sorry. Dennis was supposed to be today, and Tim and Mike and Mansfield was supposed to have been last Sunday, but Dennis had to go someplace. And you see where he's going to speak at the UN?
Yeah.
Huh? Speaking of the UN, so he was on last Sunday. But I had intended to open my remarks last Sunday by quoting, "You white guys just can't act right."
I thought, George.
Okay. I'd intended to open the session last Sunday with a quote from the 25th Psalms where David prayed, "Remember not the sins of my youth, nor my transgressions." So I want to show not to remember what Dennis and I had done 25 years ago. And I think it worked out pretty well because there was an article in the paper that said that the city can learn from what he and I are doing now. Mansfield, Tim, and Mike, and this is about race. And Tim is a liberal from way back, and he doesn't like white people. But he's been my friend. Mansfield has been a warrior in the Huff area, just consistently fight what he thinks is right. And Mike Polensek has been in the Cleveland City Council for 40 years. He is the longest serving member ever in Cleveland City Council. I invited Mike because Mike represents the Collinwood area. 85% of the people that you represent are black. And that just didn't happen. It has been going on for years. And if anybody knows something about solving the race problem, I thought I would invite him to speak about the award and the things that have been done and his response from the people that he served. So this is the panel. This is the panel. And we can speak about race. When the service was over last Sunday, one of the members came to me and said, "George, what about respect?" And I thought about that. What about respect? Both ways, black and white. I was going to the office because I don't work anymore. I was going to the office one day and I was driving behind the courthouse, the federal courthouse, at Superior and the square. And if you go around, and I was behind it on Rockwell. And as I was driving, Rockwell narrows. As you get to the square, they block off one side of the street with white stripes, so there's only one lane that you can go through. Two black kids, young black people, they were coming from behind the courthouse, and instead of crossing the street from the courthouse over to the Key Bank, when they got from behind the courthouse, they walked up the middle of the street. I was going west. They walked in front of the car, and I was going about 8-10 miles an hour. And that was the morning that I felt like I was not going to be punked. I was right, and I knew enough about the law that I had the right of way. They should have walked across the street. I kept going. They kept walking. And as the car got to them, they jumped out of the way and rolled their eyes at me. And I looked at them and rolled my eyes at them and kept going. I tell you this about respect. You got to have respect for law. You got to have respect for order. You got to have respect for people. And I knew that the position that they were taking was one that they had gathered throughout their lives, that I'm going to do it my way. Respect. We must respect each other. I didn't kill them.
Spoken just like a white man.
That's right.
I'm honored to be here. Reverend Chalker has always been an inspiration to many of us. And in my public life, I was always grateful to seek his counsel and his reflection about life. And as George just said, respect for one another, trying to get something done. I want to speak to the white people in the room. I guess I have the qualifications to do that. You know, when it comes down to this discussion of race, we fail to embrace a simple premise, and that is none of us chooses our parents or the pigmentation of our skin or our gender or our sexual orientation, or the economic situation we're born into. Nature, or nature's God, brings us here together this morning, and you wonder, why can't that be embraced as the basis of our lives? Why is it that when you look at somebody who is black and you're white, and you see such a profound difference? Why is that? Well, part of it is that we've been, in fact, taught that. And we've been taught that our entire lives. I'm speaking to the white people in this room. And we have, in many ways, distorted our history. Because I know, and you know, that this man's great-grandfather was a slave. I know and you know that in my lifetime, in your lifetime, a black person couldn't get on a bus and take a seat, couldn't walk up to a fountain and take a drink, couldn't walk into a drugstore and sit down at a counter, couldn't go into a public pool, couldn't buy a home, couldn't be a part of what we claim to be America. This issue of race lives to this day. And sadly, Mansfield and I were just talking about this, who would believe, all of us in this room, that we would have a President of the United States of America belittle a man who takes a knee at a football game when the national anthem is played. Let me just address this, and I'm going to turn this over to Mansfield. George and I served in the military. He was a Marine. He thought he was better than I was, but but let me talk about just what that means, if you will. What did that mean to me as a kid, being drafted during the Vietnam War? I went to basic training in Fort Benning, Georgia, and I went to advanced infantry training in Fort Polk. Why am I sharing this with you? Because some of the guys that were with me and were trained with me were black. And in 1966, in my lifetime, we were on our way to Fort Polk because we took a break, my friend and I, and we stopped at a place to get a coffee and breakfast because we got off a bus from New Orleans. And we walked in. This is 1966. This is the memory of my life. And we walked in, sat down, and George reminds me that I can't use the word. But as we sat down, the person came to us at the counter and said, "Sorry, we don't serve N-word here." Both of us were in our military uniforms. Both of us were in our Army uniforms. "Sorry, we don't serve N-word here." It was etched in my mind right at that moment. I said, what? My language, sorry, Reverend Trigger. I was so outraged, but my friend was smart enough to get up and walk out. He was from Miami, Florida. I, being from Youngstown, Ohio, and being of mixed blood, Irish and Italian, had to sit there for a moment, and then in my immature 20-year-old way, I ordered 2 cups of coffee. And the guy looked at me and poured the 2 cups of coffee, my friend having left the counter, and I dumped them over on the counter. And then I took one of the cups and threw it at the mirror and broke the mirror. To give you a side of my life that some of you don't know about. And then a guy came over to one of the guys that was to think he was going to take care of me. Now remember, I was 20 years old and just gone through basic training, and was a pretty tough kid. And they came over, and 2 of them were going to try to take me out, and I picked the chair up and whacked them both. Obviously, the police were called, but at the time, outside of Fort Polk, they were called the military police. And they came and took me with my friend off the porch into the car, and we got in the car, and obviously they're going to turn me in for my bizarre, terrible behavior. And we were driving, and one of them said, what the hell did you do? And I explained to him, and my friend Ray, who was sitting in the back, said, he doesn't know where he is. He's in the South. And the 2 of them started laughing. Fortunately, they went right by the place where they were to report me and took us right to our barracks. And fortunately, they were 2 black MPs. The reason I tell you this story is because Ray Morris, who was with me in Fort Polk, Louisiana, and a number of other my friends, went off to Vietnam, and I was lucky and went to Germany. And if you go to the wall, you'll see a couple of my friends' names on that wall. I was 20 years old. It stuck in me in a way that I will never forget. 2 of my friends dead, serving their country. And yet, in that moment, I realized that their country was not responding to them as 2 men two men who were serving their country, they looked at those two black soldiers as being different. And today, we have a president who looks at human beings as being different by the accident of their birth. This is not the America that many of us in this room fought for, tried to make a more decent society. So we have to renew the challenge that all of us remember and try once again to look into each other's eyes and find our common humanity.
Very, very moving story, Tim. I'd like to thank Brother Forbes for inviting me, Reverend Chalker for having me. George he told a story about respect and about these two young black men. And my response is, why respect laws that don't respect you? When you start looking at young men disrespecting the law, that's because the law disrespected them first, has been disrespecting them throughout their lives. So why should you respect something that don't respect you? I'm a writer by profession. I have a radio show. I also grow grapes, so I read a lot. I read Reverend Michael Eric Dyson's fantastic book, Tears We Cannot Stop, A Sermon to White America. In it, he eloquently states the positions that have been stated since James Baldwin, Richard Wright, other writers have written our argument down for why we should be treated equally. So his book is not new. His arguments are not new. He's restated some things that have been said actually long before that. Frederick Douglass eloquently stated them in the 1840s, making arguments for equality. Arguments that largely have gone ignored. Michael Eric Dyson's book tries to use moral suasion. He tries to make a moral argument that we should stop racism. And as eloquent and as accurate as his book is, ultimately, it's going to fail. Not because he didn't write it well, not because his arguments are not sound and of sound basis. It's going to fail because there are people on the other side of the argument that no matter how accurate your argument is, they don't want to hear it. They don't want to hear facts. They don't want to hear truths. They want to stay stuck, and they're going to stay stuck in their position. And now that we have a president that lifted up that rock, we have creatures crawling out from under it, spewing hate in America. I'm very concerned about the future of our country because Trump can get 8 years. I doubt if he will, but he can. He'll be gone. But he will leave the country in much worse shape. The people that he's inspiring will still be here. They will still give voice to the bigotry that he's inspired. The Southern Poverty Law Center has stated the number of hate groups has virtually doubled since the election. And it's fueled, Dr. Dyson's book was written from a sermon, a religious perspective. The problem, as I see it, is that the religious right, those on the far right, have been proven to be hypocrites. They're not truly religious people. They've been saying that and saying that they stand on a religious ground to deny blacks' rights, to be against gays, to be against immigrants, but they now back a president who says terrible things about what you do to women, that says terrible things about what you do to gays and to blacks, that made his money as a gambler. His wife, Michelle Obama, showed one shoulder in a photograph and the media went nuts. Oh my God, she showed a shoulder in a photograph. His wife has shown a lot more in the shoulder. And the religious right still supports him. And it's because of race. I wrote a column, I don't know, right after Trump's election. And in it, I said, maybe we ought to think about separating the country. Now that sounds extreme, and it might not happen in my lifetime, but if things don't change, it's like a bad marriage. What you don't want to happen, like in a bad marriage, it gets so bad, the police rush in, the husband and kill the wife, then he committed suicide. Both sides are dead. They would have been better separating. They would have been painful for a minute, but they at least both would be alive. I am fearful that our country is damaged beyond repair. I don't know if the two sides could ever get back together. A friend of mine that's a professor of history at Case, he made the argument that we made the mistake of the Civil War. After we whipped the Confederacy, we should have took all their slaves, freed them, and then told them, go ahead, you want a Confederacy? Go ahead and have it. We should have split the country back then. They're never going to get over losing the Civil War. We thought that they were, and in fact, Tim and I was talking. In the 60s, and some of you are old enough to understand this, in the 60s, we literally thought the civil rights movement was going to put an end to the racial divide in this country. We thought we were going to win this. George, we honestly believe that. We had no way of knowing that racism and bigotry will morph and change to fit the situation and come roaring back. It's something that we've been taught in this country and been taught for 400 years. Actually, it was brought over from parts of Europe, this racial hatred. You know, and I tell people, pigmentocracy, disliking me because of the color of my skin, is so juvenile. It really is. It's childish. If you want a reason to dislike me, there's plenty of reasons to dislike me.
Yeah, I'm sure there is.
All right. Mike is laughing. Mike is laughing too hard. Since he's laughing so hard, I'm gonna tell you a story about me and Mike that I'm having the microphone. We were having a discussion. I don't know if somebody else was there. I don't think it was just Mike and I. And Mike said, man, I'm so tired of all this racial crap. And I looked at him, I said, Mike, you think you tired? Try being black. We're really tired of it, and we didn't start it, and we can't finish it. It's up to white folks to finish it.
Good morning. It's Reverend Chalker and to the gathering here. You know, George, you bounced us for Dennis Kucinich. That's what I meant. Okay. Boy, I tell you. My perspective is, and my background is a little different. I represent, those of you who don't, I represent the 8th Ward, Cleveland's northeast side. Goes from East 200th Street west to the village of Bracknell, south in what they call now Collinwood Village, a portion of that, and then zigzags like a saw down Eddy Road. So it's a very unique area, very different area. I was born in the city of Cleveland, 427 East 120th in Glenville between Oakview and Sellers. Grandma's house is still there, same house my mother was born into. In fact, I drive there all the time. park out there, think about the days when I was a child there, and I'm sure folks on the street say, who's this white guy sitting out here, okay? But the fact of the matter is, it gave me a great perspective growing, living in Glenville as a youngster, then coming back to visit Grandma and Grandpa repeatedly. And then my mother moved me into the Collinwood neighborhood where I grew up, attended Collinwood High School, ran for public office and was elected in November of 1977. So I've served a very, very long time. I've seen it all in city council. I've seen the good, the bad, and the ugly, okay? But what I've learned in my time in city council, in the last 26 plus years, I have represented a ward that's predominantly African American. What I learned very quickly, and some of the old timers, I was fortunate when I came into city council, there was still a core group of what we call the old time members of city council. And there was a neighbor of mine by the name of Caesar Moss, a dear friend of George's. And one of the first things Caesar said to me when I became a councilman, sat down, he said, answer the telephone. Answer the phone. Return the phone calls. And if somebody wants to see you, go to their house. I have maintained that same posture ever since. And what I've learned in dealing with folks, there isn't a whole lot of difference between people. I can tell you that without any fear, representing the community. No one else is represented in city council, represents an area like I do. That people are concerned about their quality of life. They're concerned about the environment for their families. They're concerned about the world in which they live. They're concerned what schools their kids go to. At the end of the day, as we've heard, people make an issue out of color and where you grew up at. At the end of the day, as I learned representing people, they're concerned about their environment. They're concerned about their world. So that's been my focus and why I've been successful in getting elected 11 consecutive times, overwhelmingly, because I take care of my constituents. I don't care who they are, what color, where they've come from, what nationality, what religion. I try to help them every which way I can, and it's been successful for me. And I think part of the challenge has been in our city is that we have the historic games that have been played with redistricting, where wards were redistricted along racial lines. We saw it 4 years ago where the Glenville community was just tore up. I mean, when I say tore up, I mean tore up through the redistricting process, where folks today in Glenville, they still can't figure out what ward they're in, especially the old folks. That was done deliberately, and I've listened to Tim and George and others talk about their experiences in the South. And I can tell you without any fear of any contradiction, to me it was done exactly what they did in the Deep South, to disenfranchise people. This is in Cleveland. This was in Cleveland 4 years ago. It was done to deliberately to disenfranchise people. And you know what? It almost worked. Look at in just this last election. Only 13% of the people voted in Cleveland. 87% of the people sat home. Ask yourself today, what would Dr. King say? That 87% of the people did not vote, did not take the time after everything, the experience in this country with the men and women in armed services sacrificed, the civil rights movement, the labor movement, the women's suffrage movement. Think about all the suffering and what people did. I drive down St. Clair, I drive past 140th and St. Clair. There used to be a Fisher body plant there. I was looking at some old reports where people were beaten in the street by corporate thugs because they wanted a union. I mean, virtually beaten with clubs in the street. We saw what happened in the civil rights movement. I mean, I can't believe today in Cleveland that so many people feel that, you know, what the heck, it ain't worth my time. Beautiful day, beautiful election day, people didn't come out to vote. But I've learned that, because I saw it. I saw what my grandparents were one of the last Caucasian families in Glenville. They left in the late 60s because it was getting a little dicey for them. And it was so ridiculous what I saw. It wasn't the homeowners, it wasn't the people who cared. It was this, as George mentioned about respect. We have a core element in our city today, in many of our neighborhoods, that there is no respect. and I've come to the point where my diplomacy is gone and my political correctness is gone. I call it like it is. If you want respect, you've got to earn it. And you've got to obey the law. You got to respect people's property and their rights. And so I saw what happened to my grandparents in Glenville, and then I saw the stupidity when I was in Collinwood High School on the other side of the coin, the racial conflict in Collinwood. And it was like, it was so stupid. And again, it was the same mentality almost that I'm dealing with today, or I am dealing with today, the individuals who want to go out and terrorize neighborhoods, rob women at bus stops, won't get out of the street when you're coming down the street, tear up everything they can. And my position is, if you want to do that, then be prepared to pay the price, because I'm not giving up on my neighborhood, I'm not giving up in my city, and I would call upon all people. We've got to look out for each other as brothers and sisters and care about our neighbors. I live on a street that's predominantly African American in Collinwood. And you know what? I would put my street against any street in this county, because people look out for one another. They care about each other. They take care of their property. Their kids are all respectful. If one of those kids walking out, she has a problem, they know they can run in my house. That's the kind of city that I dream for, where people care about one another. And this disrespect or this attitude that you can do whatever you want or tear up a neighborhood is created a real problem for us, because in the next, whoever's elected this time in city council and in the mayor's office, they're going to redistrict again. Some people are predicting that we're going to lose 2 more wards in the city because of population loss on the southeast side and the northeast side. Realize Glenville High School is around 400 students now.
How many?
400. That's it. Collinwood is about the same. Collinwood was the largest high school in the state of Ohio for over 3 decades, and Glenville was right behind it. So what does that tell me and what I know? Because we got to look at the bigger picture here, demographics. There's a migration out of the east side, still out of the east side. It's going east. There's a migration out of Glenville going into Euclid, Richmond Heights, South Euclid. There's an exodus out of the southeast side going into Garfield Heights, Maple, Bedford Heights, Warrensville, etc. And people are talking with their feet. They're talking with their feet. They're going to where there's better schools, better services, better safety, their quality of life. And unless we can figure out collectively in this city and in city council, and I will tell you, there's some people in city council that are in denial. They don't, for some reason, they don't see it. But how can you not? It's in your face. How can you deny the obvious of what's happening here? So we can continue to ignore it and think that somehow by plowing tens and tens of millions of dollars into sports complexes is going to stabilize neighborhoods, but I can tell you it won't. It defies. In Cleveland, this whole trickle-down theory doesn't work. It trickles up. We defy gravity in Cleveland. We have defied gravity, and you can see it. And when you get into neighborhoods like Glenville, and I'm in Glenville all the time, and he kids me, he says he knows for sure the city's going to hell because I'm the first white councilman back in Glenville since 1964, okay? But when you see it, when you see the poverty and you see the despair, the abandoned homes, you know what? We all collectively got to join together and say, we're not going to tolerate that. We're not going to continue to, as in 2017 in our own city, to see immense poverty and lack of opportunity. Unacceptable. I don't care what race, what color you are. That's totally unacceptable. We have all got to figure out as a society how to start fixing these problems, and they have schools that are not functioning, where kids cannot excel and become somebody. Is not the way I want to live. So I'm committed to continue to do what I have to do, working with a whole host of folks. And I really appreciate George putting this on and the church sponsoring it, because there needs to be more talk and frank talk about race, but not only race, about the economic realities, the lack of opportunity the lack of jobs, the lack of, why don't we have vocational and technical training in our schools once again? For our kids. Why don't we? I don't get it. Kids on the east side, it can't be electricians and carpenters and plumbers and HVAC and fix computers. Why is that? Why when they built the new Max Hayes, they built it farther west, West 65th Street? I raised that. Why? You think kids from Glenville are going to go all the way over to West 65th Street? Ain't going to happen. See, there are decisions being made in this town today, as we sit here, that are not good decisions on behalf of poor people and kids of color, and we've got to figure out collectively how to correct it. So again, I'm thankful to be here today. Thank you. God bless all of you. Thank you.
Michael.
Thank you.
Michael, let me ask you, and then we're going to throw it open to the public. I was talking to Ken Johnson, and he told him that you try to get black councilmen to follow the concepts and talking about the things that go on with the people and calling, and I've publicly seen you and read about you calling out young hoodlums and young people that violate the law and what have you, and deterioration, causing deterioration in the neighborhood. When you go speak to your constituents, in particular black constituents, what are their response to you? How do they respond to you?
It was overwhelmingly in support. Overwhelming. George, they told me we're fed up with this stuff. We can't sit on our porches at night. We can't. You've heard the street lamp example. When the street lights go on, elderly black folks have to go in their houses. Something's wrong with that picture in Cleveland in 2017. So I caught no pushback, just the opposite. People were calling me, writing me, saying, you said what needed to be said. We're tired. We can't live like this. And that's part of this exodus out. You know, I'm dealing with a little old lady the other day in Glenville, 83 years old, lives by herself. Her kids are out of state. 123rd Street. She gets her car stolen, her only means of transportation. All she has is liability on her car because it's an older Buick. Now, Mike, I can't get around. Is there any type of transportation that can pick me up, take me to doctor, stuff like that? Then they come back the week later and steal her lawnmower. Yeah. So now she can't cut her grass. See, that might not, that might not be sexy in the world in which other folks are dealing. It's certainly not as sexy as you're talking about the Q Arena. But I deal with the real world. And elderly folks, especially elderly African Americans, they're not happy because they're living in neighborhoods and in housing, first of all, that they can't repair anymore, they can't maintain. They're on fixed income pensions, but they're living in neighborhoods they can't escape from. They're virtually trapped. And these are neighborhoods that they grew up in. And then I'm at another meeting in Glenville. A lady says to me at the Glenville Rec Center, she says, when I die, my house is going to become abandoned. Ma'am, why is that? She said, I have 3 children, one in Richmond Heights, one in Euclid, and one out of state. And my kids don't want my house. And they all went to Glenville High School. We grew up in the Glenville community. They don't want nothing to do with my house. So Mike, telling myself and Councilman Conwell, my house can be abandoned because my kids don't want to come back here. They don't want my house. That's the reality that I deal with every day. That's the world that I deal with. Folks that the roof is leaking and they can't fix it because they have no money. They're afraid to go to the store for what's going to happen to them. We had a situation where we had women being robbed in a bus stop on 105th Street on their way to going to work, waiting in the bus stops to go to work. Guns stuck in their faces. That's unacceptable in our society. And so you know what I call myself today? I call myself a journeyman councilman. I do this full time. George knows the charter, that councilmen we're supposed to be legislators. That's 10% or less of my job today. I become a social worker, a psychologist, an animal warden. You name it. I become a jack of all trade and probably an expert at none. But that's what I'm dealing with today, and I try to do the best I can on behalf of my constituents. But I will tell you, I tell all my friends in the corporate community who want to keep, talking about the glitz and glamour, come into my office and answer my phone for 1 week and see how your world and your perspective of Cleveland will change. It will have to change. We have to get back to basics and start caring about people in the world in which they live. And if not, these issues of poverty, despair, kids living in godly, some of the situations you see some of these kids in today. And believe me, I have one of the better wards in the city. I can only imagine what goes on in some of the poorer wards of the city. Yeah.
Can I?
We're going to have 5 more minutes between us, and then throw it out to the public. Okay.
I appreciate the horror stories.
Yeah.
And there's plenty of horror stories.
Yeah.
So the question is, when you hear about dysfunction, when you hear about crime is always a function of poverty, always.
That's right.
Because in wealthier neighborhoods, you don't hear about crime. Did these young people put themselves in poverty?
No.
Or is there something genetically wrong with young black men? Or was something done to them that has been done for literally centuries? What you're seeing is the result of centuries of disenfranchisement. Now, when slavery was over, 2/3 of the black race managed to move up into the middle class. 1/3 has not been able to, because it was against the law to teach slaves to read. But evidently some slaves said, I'm going to teach my kids to read. I don't care if I get a beating for it. That was my grandparents. They learned to read. They learned to get educated. They educated their kids, who educated me. That 1/3 that eschewed education, that were afraid, that live in poverty, that still are mired in poverty and lack of goals, a lack of education, government policy put them there. Make no mistake, it's nothing wrong with them except government did something to them. We must understand that.
And let me, talking about race, Reverend Schalker will find this provocative, I assume. You know what the biggest problem about race is? A lot of people in this room think God is white.
She ain't
A
white.
lot of people think God is white, male, and heterosexual. If you think about the premise of race, at the heart of the discussion about how we see ourselves is the God we pray to. And it seems to me that when you strip away all of these discussions, it has much to do with how we see ourselves as individuals and in a group. And if you pray to a white God, this is the society you get. This is the society and the country you get. And so I think when you consider the questions that we're trying to address, at the heart of that is our identity, our sense of purpose, our sense of sharing this moment together, and what does it all mean in the end, and how do you define yourself in that regard. So I would hope I would hope we would rethink our place and our obligations to each other.
Let me just close it with this. At the height of my career during being the president of the Cleveland City Council, I had a discussion one day with Mercedes Cotton, and she was my aide, my companion, my friend, my advisor. And we were talking one day, and I said to her that I don't have any white friends. This race is crazy. It screws you up, I'm telling you. And she said, what did you say? And we had been working together. We worked in the same office. And I had enough sense when I got to be president of council that I needed somebody that I could confide in and somebody that would protect me. And whenever I would go to meetings downtown, uptown, with businessmen, she was always with me. And she would always advise me, and we would talk about these things. So she said, what did you say? I said, I don't have any white friends. And she says, well, what about me? I said, well, yeah. She said, well, what about Jim Stanton? I said, yeah. She said, what about Tony Garofalo? Yeah. She said, what about Tim? She said, George, I don't know of any black friends that you have. I was confused that you had to be black to be a friend. It was just that, okay, y'all ask questions. Will you? Yes, ma'am. Oh, hey.
Hi, I'm not a good public speaker, so I'm going to read from my notes. I have a question and a comment. Ohio is one of the most gerrymandered states. Comments would be welcome from you about the efforts of gerrymandering and how it affects equal representation and how this plays into racism. And I know you have commented about the city.
Talk about gerrymandering.
How that was affected. And I'd like all the rest of you to know that individual citizens can make a difference. There is an initiative petition that's throughout the state. If enough signatures are obtained, it will be placed on the 2018 ballot. And essentially what it will do is to remove redistricting from the politicians to a bipartisan commission. It isn't perfect, but it's certainly much better than what we have now. And this pertains to the redrawing of voter districts that will occur after the 2020 census. And I have a petition for signatures for anyone who's not had the opportunity to sign one.
Well, I can only briefly say this. It's clear that in Ohio, districts were drawn to isolate and to magnify minority voting, minority populations within a city, and in essence, isolate them politically. That's just what they did, and they were very successful at doing it. And I've represented a mixed ward, and I've always maintained a ward that's predominantly African American. If you treat people right, I wish I could draw lines where every Caucasian representative, there's no way you could really possibly do it, but where you'd have to have a minority population within your district. So then you'd get a better perspective on life and a better understanding as to what people are experiencing. I mean, I don't, this whole thing about we got to draw a district in a way where we isolate black voters, I just can't understand that mentality. It's about power, it's about maintaining power, and look at Ohio. As a result of this gerrymandering, we are at the bottom of most every major indicator in this country. Ohio has become a backward state.
But, you know, Ohio is not the only state that we see this in.
Yeah.
In fact, California has an initiative to do away with lines being drawn by state legislators, because they're always, whoever's in power is always going to draw the lines to, you know, enhance power of their party. Right. And they started this, Republicans started this 2 decades ago while Democrats were asleep to control state legislatures then we can draw the lines. And now you're seeing the results of their efforts. And, you know, and it hit me while I was sitting here that 13% voter turnout at this last mayoral election at the primary, I think that's a reflection of people being depressed by Donald Trump. I honestly think that's why people are saying, I want no more to do with electoral politics. Look what we got. My vote don't count. My answer, of course, is they only count them one at a time, so every vote counts.
Right.
But how do you convince people of that?
Thank you, gentlemen. I have a question for a couple of years from now. Why do we have a superintendent who openly, clearly states that the goal is that children can read by the 3rd grade? You have robbed the children of 2-3 years of learning, and nobody is standing up and saying, how did they get to 3rd grade?
I want to tackle that one.
I don't know. Which superintendent are you talking about?
You're talking about the superintendent of Cleveland Public Schools? Correct. That, and let me make sure I understand the question, that children should read by 3rd grade?
Yes.
No.
How about 1st grade?
Exactly, that's where I was going to go. Let me tell you my take, and I get pushback. I think parents, I think as a society, we're shifting responsibility for the education of kids too much to the schools. It is the parents' main responsibility that the children are educated. Now, with that said, we say, if the parent would just read to them, what if that parent is functionally illiterate and can't read and don't want the child to know it? What I'm telling you is that kind of functional illiteracy goes back generation upon generation upon generation back to the door of the slave cabin that I talked about. Those are the 1/3 that are mired in poverty. What we need to do, and Jeffrey Canada did it with the Harlem Children's Zone in New York, and we have promise neighborhoods here. We have to, when young mothers have a baby, we have to say, come here, young lady, please let us help you. We have to show them, and oftentimes we're raising the parent and the child at the same time. But if we start at the day the child is born, they can read by the time they're 3 years old, you know that. If we start with the right, talking to them, showing parents how to be good parents. That's our call as a society. We have to do that, and then we won't have the crime that Michael has been talking about. Or the disrespect. Yeah.
Let me get back to your proposition, and you spoke about the commission that's being appointed that's going to do redistricting by an independent group of people. I think that's what you refer to. Is that right, ma'am? Yeah. I think it's the right thing to do, and it's composed of Republicans and Democrats, and they would draw the lines, non-political, based upon what the state should do. I think that's the right thing to do, and let me tell you why I think that. I have drawn the lines to redistrict the city of Cleveland. I think I did it about 3 times. And even though I thought I should do the right thing but I made sure that the lines were drawn, that I would get people elected who would be favorable for me being the president of city council. Now that's, you gotta recognize this. You gotta recognize this. Where I could be nonpartisan, I was nonpartisan. But where I had to be partisan, make sure that my people that loved me, they got the lines drawn to include who was in their wards. Now that's the practical effect of politics. And that's why it should be moved to an independent commission. Okay? I ain't all. I'm 86, I gotta try to get to heaven.
You're a reason not to like black people, you know? Let me put something in everybody's mind about this. One of the reasons redistricting originally came into existence in the sense of in the last 30, 40 years was to make sure that minorities got elected to Congress. Everybody forgets this. Louis Stokes got elected to Congress because of the redistricting that took place in 1968. First black to be elected to Congress from Ohio. Now, as George and everybody else has pointed out, it's now manipulated to a point where now the party in power, the Republicans, hold a 12-4 advantage in Congress of Republicans and Democrats in the Congress of the United States, and they did that purposely. So it's important to sign the petition and to get involved in this, because it would make a profound difference in the way, as the councilman just indicated. If you have a constituency that is a mixed constituency, you have a different perspective of who you represent. But if you're elected and you're a Republican in a white reactionary district, and by the way, that's true across the state of Ohio now, you only have one primary to worry about, not a general, but a primary to worry about. If you can rile and appeal to the prejudices and the bigotry of people in a primary, you can get elected. That's right. Yep. That's a fact. Yep. So either you believe in democracy and you get involved, or you don't. It's just that simple. I mean, everybody's sitting around complaining and, oh, what the hell. I understand. I'm as frustrated as everybody else in the room. But if you don't do anything, it's going to continue. It's going to continue. That's why Donald Trump got elected. I mean, I hate to put it on the line. That is exactly why. Appeal to the worst instincts of people, and there is a certain majority in this country that will respond. It's that simple.
Let me tell you one final story. Mercedes Connors and I, one day, I got a call from the editor of the Cleveland Press, and they wanted to talk to me about I can't recall what it was something that was important to the city of Cleveland. And they said, can we have lunch? And I said, yes. So they wanted to have lunch in the Cleveland Club. And the Cleveland Club was a club that was at the Erie Tower, I believe. And so I said, Merce, let's go over. And we went over, and as we went into the lobby of the club, they said to me, well, we have a private room that we're going to go to. So I said, this must be really important. We're not going into the club itself. And they said, no, Merce can't go into the club. I said, what? She could not go into the club because they did not allow women. And I was awestruck. Here I have been segregated against and discriminated against all my life. And my friend could not go into the restaurant with me to have lunch with these men. So I says, if I can't go, if she can't go, I can't go. And she said, no, this is important. Let's go to the private room. I raised so much hell about that eventually the Cleveland Press took the stand that club had to open its doors to women. So in Mansfield, it was because that I was used to being discriminated against, but to see somebody else discriminated against, it was just profound to me. Yeah. We got to close. Is it time to leave?
Can I have one question? Just real quick, thanks, gentlemen, for participating this time. And I just like to reiterate that there are solutions to our educational problem, and one of those solutions is freedom schools. Hello, freedom school is a solution to our educational problems in America, okay? I'm from New York, specifically Memphis, Stuyvesant.
Okay, white guys.
Okay, white guy, I'll take it. Well, I think it is by design. I think the economy, the whole society is based on economics. But it's not based on loving one another. What are you kidding? If that were the case, we wouldn't be having this discussion. The United States economy is based on money, period, end of the discussion. So if you can turn a community that was once poor, I know a little bit about this because Robert Kennedy, back in '68, invested in Bed-Stuy, and at that moment, it was a noble effort to try to make a change. Now, the investments are multi-billionaire, in fact, in one case, buying up property. But by the way, let's flip the side for just a discussion. If you're poor and brown or black in Bed-Stuy, and somebody says, you know, that place you've been living in for $40,000 or $35,000 is now worth $1 million. Okay, give me the money. You know, people are making judgments individually on the basis of their own self-interest. You can't sit there and say, well, why don't you all, if you all stay together here, it doesn't work that way. And it is public policy, and it is a policy. Let me just point out something that most people in this room probably do not know. Federal housing projects after the Second World War until 1971, you could discriminate against blacks. You could not get funding in some of the federal housing projects that were developed after the Second World War. It's been a policy of the country and you know, the way they justified that policy was always economics. It would say, you know, here's the cutoff. Well, the cutoff is, as has been said, 2/3 of the people in the black community, 2/3 of the black community lived below the poverty level at the time they were doing it. So what did they do? The banks, well, you know, you got to have an income of $25,000. If you had it below that, you didn't get the loan. And then they said, well, we're not discriminating. Of course you're discriminating. As Mansfield said, historically, that's what's happened in this country. From the very beginning, that's what's happened. So how do you address it? You start making public policy at the national level that addresses the issue about these investments in the community. And I want to end it with, at least make my final statement about this. The councilman was making a point about downtown investments. Here's the dilemma if you're in public life. You can kick the hell out of me for this, but I was one of the people, Mike and I argued about this, about the basketball and baseball and football. Why do that, Tim? You're awarding billionaires and millionaires and giving them a building to play in for nothing. Here's the problem. In the course of trying to make that decision, 40% of the values, the assessed values of the buildings in downtown Cleveland decreased. So what's that mean, Tim? That means 70% of the ability to fund the school system in the city of Cleveland is based on the property tax. If the property tax in the communities, the houses, dropped at one time from $100,000 to $40,000 on average, Mike, within the city, you're damned if you do and damned if you don't. Now, here's the problem, where Mike and I bet you all four of us would agree. If you had a graduated income tax in the county or statewide to fund the schools, it would be fairer. You couldn't get them to do that in Columbus. You would, because why? Because suburban people would have to pay for their $250,000, $500,000, $1 million homes. The difference would be, what would there be their income to pay to have schools that are fair and give every kid a break? So I suffered the consequences of politically facing the reality that people saying, Tim, why are you rewarding these millionaires and billionaires? You know, and I used to say, I wish Mother Teresa owned the damn teams. She doesn't. And that was the frustration of, you didn't have a choice. It's so hard to explain to the voters, you didn't have an option to fund fund the schools in the city of Cleveland. It was a property tax. So here's the good news. The property tax and the value of the buildings in downtown Cleveland have gone up significantly, and there's a major investment. That, I agree with Mike, though. That's not the answer to the problems within the city of Cleveland, clearly. It's a part of an answer, but if you don't invest in those neighborhoods and recommit yourself to that, you're going to continue to have the kind of exodus from the city completely, just like it happened in Bedford side.
Well, you know, gentrification is happening across the United States. People are saying, you know, I live 30, 40 miles, have to commute every day. I'd rather move back into the city. That's what happened in Bed-Stuy. It's happening particularly in San Francisco. It's happening in Washington, D.C. Very strong. It's happening here in Cleveland. I live in the Huff community, and there's a real concern because we're the closest community to University Circle, Cleveland Clinic, Case Western, and you know, institutions like that have to grow or die. And so there's a real fear that they're going to take something from us. Gentrification is not necessarily a bad word if you know how to control it.
Right.
Because what happened was, now that those homes are valued at $1 million, guess what? There's more tax revenue. Better to control that, because you can't stop it, number one. Communities are going to gentrify, but we conflate gentrification with white, and that's not necessarily the case.
Correct.
My wife and I built a home in Huff, fairly substantial home. You could say we gentrified it. So if you can manage gentrification, not push people out, and if people were politically more astute and got together, you could stop the wrong kind of gentrification in its tracks. But that comes from political clout. The people in a community that are afraid of gentrification have to organize politically and make sure it works for them as well as for the people who want to come into their community. Oh, and Mike told me when we were talking, and he proved it. Mike said he would work a funeral, and he did. No, he
I totally agree. It's a balancing act. People would argue that Tremont, Ohio City are a prime example of that.
Exactly.
Hit the bottom, and then people came in with money. Fannie long maintained that if it wasn't for her and others, there would be no Huff today. That Huff would have been totally eliminated. And so, as a result of what the clinic wanted. So it is a balancing act. It's providing more assistance, more programs to help people to improve their existing housing stock, which is a big problem in the city, a big problem. We need to have more programs, clear and concise programs to help people to stay and improve their existing housing. There's all this emphasis about building new housing. The majority of housing stock in the city of Cleveland, the majority of it predates the Second World War. If we don't come up with programs to help people, we're going to see more demolition, more exodus, and what we're all talking about, than folks coming in with money and poor people being forced out. That is not right, and that's unacceptable. Thank you.
Some people say we need to go to church. But you know what? We've been having church. And I am grateful for the articulate, sincere, honest comments or conversation we've had this morning. And you know what else, just as we do leave for our worship experience? The very things you've talked about today, particularly on that gerrymandering and all those other things, you could not have a more articulate reason for why University Circle Church needs to exist. If you think, I know you don't, but how rare this congregation is, how rare this church community is. You've got people praying to a white God, Tim, in United Methodism all over this state. And their prayers are reflecting decisions that are being made at annual conference about people. So it's an articulate, wonderful expression of not only what our city needs, but another articulate expression of why we need to make sure University Circle United Methodist Church is a vibrant family of faith. Let's go to church. Thank you, George.